Well, thank you for joining me every day, and everybody, and thanks to Kobiton for having me. We'll get started. So, just quickly, a little bit about my background. I'm a principal automation architect at a company called Magenic. We are a consulting company, and we can help you with your development, but we'll also do QA only engagements, and we'll do automation only engagements as well. I spent my career focused on automation. I did do a short stint as a director of QA at a company, but other than that, I've been focused directly or indirectly on creating automation strategies, implementations, tools, frameworks, etc. I'm also an advisor to STPCon and the Advanced Research Center for Software Test and Quality Assurance at the University of Texas at Dallas. If you would like to get in touch with me outside of this particular forum, here's my contact info. Uh, the bottom link there is my blog. And if you're interested in contacting Magenic, you can contact us at www.magenic.com. So I'm not much of an agenda guy, so I will jump right into to talking about stuff. So who has heard of King Pyrrhus? King Pyrrhus was the king of Epirus, and he's got a term named after him that many of us may have heard, but he is most notable for the so-called Pyrrhic Wars, where he and his army suffered irreplaceable casualties while trying to defeat the Romans at Herculea in 280 BC and in Anculum in 279 BC. So irreplaceable losses. He won the wars, but he lost so many of his soldiers that he really could not replace them. So, was that responsible? Something a little closer, a little more near and dear to my heart as a rock and roll fan and metalhead is a rock and roll singer back from the 80s. Biggest band in the world, arguably, at the time. I once heard a quote said that this band could sell out a stadium at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Huge band. But the singer had some problems, and he was chronically late for shows. He would cancel shows, stop singing in the middle of shows. There was once even a riot over the behavior of the band. So the band implodes and sort of breaks up and sort of goes their separate ways. So this huge successful business concern, not just the art and the music and the fandom aspect, but the huge business concern that was this band sort of dissipated. Was that responsible? And something a little more personal from my own career, a former leader of mine. We were brought into, myself and another architect were brought in to work on a particular tool initiative. After a very short period of time, we said, hey, we should not follow this particular initiative because the users aren't ready for it. It's not the right time for this. We should abandon this and come back later, but we were instructed to keep going anyway. 18 months later, what happened? We abandoned it anyway. Was that responsible activity by this particular leader? And we're going to come back and revisit this particular leader at the end and talk about responsibility and context. But while we're talking about responsibility, I want to introduce a couple of definitions for us. Being irresponsible is not showing good judgment. So if you're irresponsible, you're showing poor judgment, which means being responsible is showing good judgment and being able to trust ourselves and to trust others to do what is right. And while we're talking about terminology and definitions, when I talk about automation in general, and certainly throughout this particular talk, I consider automation not just something based on test cases and test scripts and tools. I talk about automation being the judicious application of technology to help humans do their jobs. And this is an important facet for some of the aspects of the rest of the talk here. So when I talk about automation, I'm not just talking about test cases. I'm talking about applying technologies to help humans. And in most cases, the humans we're talking about here today are testers. And before we go too far, automation is software development, and we need to treat it that way. And we'll talk a bit about that today as well. And to be absolutely clear, automation is not a thing we do. We don't just automate. Automation is a means to an end, and it always must be in support of business objectives. So automation needs to be in direct support of the individuals doing the testing, whether it's developers, whether it's testers, whether it's QA people, whether it's whoever. It needs to be in direct support of that. Automation does not stand alone as a force multiplier for the people that are using it. But all of those things must be aligned with the business objectives, because software development is a business activity as well. So in order to be responsible, we need some knowledge, right? Because if we're going to exercise good judgment, we need to be knowledgeable. If we're going to be responsible, trusted to do what is right, what is appropriate, we need to know what is right, what is appropriate. So when we talk about automation, there really are two important things to know. One, what we just talked about, automation is a business decision. We'll talk a bit about that. And then treating automation code like product code, we'll also talk about a bit of that. So business decisions. In order to make good business decisions, to be responsible about our business approach to automation, we have to know our own world. You have to know your world. I have to know my world. And that world comes in three chunks. One, goals. Again, what we develop, what we do here needs to be in direct support of goals, the business goals of the team, of the organization, and of the company. Because if we're at odds with those goals, we're not adding appropriate value. So do we want to get to market faster? Do we want to reduce our defects? What is the business activity we're looking to do? How is development aligned to that? How is the testing going to be done in support of that? Let's make sure our automation is in support of that as well. The second facet is the audience. Who is going to be writing, executing, maintaining, and consuming and acting upon the results of the automation? It matters because you will pick, or I pick, different technologies and different approaches to automation based on who's in the audience. So if the audience is programmers, whether testers or not, as long the people that are going to actually implement the automation are programmers, I will probably take a different tooling approach than if the audience, the people who are actually developing the automation, either are not programmers at all, or very sort of moderate or novice programmers. Nothing wrong with that. It's just different tools for different audiences so that you can recoup the appropriate value. And third is the environment. This is the one most of us tend to get right. What are you testing? Where are you going to test it? How are you going to test it? What are we automating against? What interfaces do we need? What operating systems do we need to cover? These three facets really are a good umbrella approach around selection of technology, selection of tools to help us do our job, but also for how we approach doing that job. Because under that goals and strategies, we can build an automation strategy and an automation implementation based on those three facets. So in addition to knowing our own world, we need to know about the world outside of us, because we don't develop software in a vacuum. Software development is it's a social activity. It's a technological activity. It's a scientific activity. It's an artistic activity, but it's also a social activity, because all these different sort of facets and influences come in and affect how we're doing our job. So often we want free. We want free, we want free, we want free. We don't want to pay a vendor for a particular tool, service, whatever. We want to go a different route, something we can do it ourselves, or something that we can download and run. But vendor tools can provide value. A lot of times, vendor tools will come with integrations with other tools. It'll all be built together already. If you are not a very strong developer from a tool standpoint, or it's not your core competency, I don't have time to build my own framework because I have to deliver product. Consider vendor tools. Yes, they do come with a price tag, but that doesn't mean that they're not valuable. So when you vet tools, when you vet vendors, Put the hat of total cost of ownership on and understand if you're going to do this yourself or if you're going to do this with open source, what's the real cost going to be there? You may not be outlaying cash up front, but there will be some effort and some opportunity cost along the way that we have to remember that if I'm building my own tool, then there's some part of the product that I'm not actively building as well. So the effort I spend building that tool or dealing with that open source had better be worth it. And open source software, to continue with the thought there, is not really free. It is free from a license standpoint. You don't have to pay anyone for the license. You don't have to pay anyone for the right to use it. But we do have to expend effort on it. So we have to have the effort to write the test scripts or to write whatever application we're going to use on top of the open source. We have to deal with integrating it with other pieces of our system if we need to do integrations. There are not a lot of open source tools out there that really have, oh, hey, look, I'm going to do mobile and web service testing and browser-based testing and thick client testing and database testing and email testing all put together. There are different tools for that. And then it's up to the user, the automator, to blend those if blending's necessary, right? If all you have is one interface, then perhaps taking that approach is something that we can find value in. But if we have to go across interfaces, which most of us do today, very few of us have the luxury of just having one particular type of interface, we're going to have multiple tools, and we're going to have multiple scripts or tests or what have you to drive those. If we need to cross the streams and in the same test script, test case, have the ability to, say, interact with a web browser and with a mobile app, we're going to have to build that integration together, whereas vendor-supplied tools might have that integration built in already. There is no right answer here. It's about making a responsible choice from a business standpoint so that you can accomplish your technology goals, which should be in line with your business goals. And we have to plan for maintenance. When your software is done, right, when your product is finished, then your automation is finished. But usually our products are not finished. I used to work at a company saying, when's the website going to be finished? And the answer I always like to give, well, we were an e-com company, so, well, when Amazon stops changing their website and stops changing their business, then we'll probably stop changing ours, and then the automation can stop at that point as well. But there will be maintenance. You will find problems, because remember, automation development is software development. We are not perfect. So we will inject bugs, we will inject issues into our software, and we'll need to debug those issues. We'll need to make updates to the software so that we can have additional value. We will have to take new versions of the tool. Bugs will be fixed in the tool. Features will be added that we will find valuable. New operating systems will be supported. Old operating systems will be end of life. We need to be prepared to absorb this. Maintenance also is not free, so it needs to be planned into your plan from building your automation initiative from the beginning. And we need to understand what's going on in the technology world. We work in technology, right? So we all know how fast things change. Frequently I get asked, hey, I see you're using tool X to perform this particular activity. Why aren't you using tool Y? Well, primarily because tool Y didn't exist when we started this particular activity, so it wasn't even a choice. If X and Y existed at the same time, would I pick X over Y? I don't know. That's a different question based on a different context in a different time. And context really is the key here. All of these things that we're talking about are context specific, meaning they're going to be different for my team and my organization versus your team and your organization, because we have different teams, different organizations, different businesses, different technologies, and different goals. All of these things are different, so we have to make appropriate choices for all these different aspects when we automate, when we choose what to automate, when we choose how to automate, and what technologies we pick. So responsibility also requires good judgment. So sort of the pun coming from the title, with great judgment comes great responsibility. So if you have great judgment, then you probably will have a great great amount of responsibility and be quite responsible as well. Um, but it also requires that you have this capability because you are making decisions that impact the business. It may feel like we are far removed from business decisions when we decide we're going to use one tool versus another tool, or we're going to go BDD versus ATDD, or record and playback versus scripting. It feels like we're far removed from the business, but all of these choices and approaches have business impacts. They will all have positive impacts and they will all have negative impacts because nothing's perfect. Everything you pick will have a downside, but we have to be mindful of the fact that we need to pick what is going to provide the most value at a reasonable, a fair, and appropriate cost. So you've heard me say value a lot, and value really is the key here. So what's the value target that your particular company, organization, or team is looking at? Are we looking to save time? Is time at an essence? We're looking to do more in the same amount of time that we have. Is data important? Are we looking to shove an additional amount of data through our system so we can get more coverage? Are we looking to or are we looking to gain more data? Are we looking to increase our coverage so more data comes out and we have a better idea of how our product is performing? What about speed? Speed's a big deal these days, and not so much speed of the actual product itself, although for some products that's absolutely key, but more speed to market. We're living in a very short attention span world. So if you're not looking at what your competitors are doing and what your clients are now changing their needs to, you're going to lag behind. So you want to get out to the market quickly with an appropriate amount of quality, because bug-free software doesn't exist, right? We've all been in this for some amount of time. Some of us maybe for a few days. Some of us, like me, for many years. Bug-free software is just not feasible on any application of any particular size, complexity, and value. So getting things out to market quickly, getting fixes to market quickly, failing fast, changing fast, perhaps that's what our one of our business targets is. Communication. One of our business targets is communication with our users or with our other teams, or any of those types of communication activities. Are those key? Are those something we are focusing on from a business aspect? Because if so, we need to develop the software to support that, and then we need to test it with that in mind, and then we build the tools and the automation to be in support of testing that. But what this all really comes down to, it all comes down to a dirty little secret that's not so secret, and that is it all comes down to money. So very few of us work for free. Very few of us have the ability and the resources to do that. I do not. I work because I need to. I work because I like it. I like my job. I like automation. I like coming out and getting to speak to people like you on the call today. But there is a mercenary business, personal business side of this as well, saying that I need to be compensated for my value, for my work, for my output, so that I can provide for my family, my kids. I can do activities that I want. I can afford to go on vacation and fix the car when it breaks, and all these other things. I can't do those things if the company I work for is not profitable, because if the company I work for is not profitable, and because very few of us are working for nonprofits. But if we're not profitable, then at some point, myself, my team, somebody's going to lose their job, and the company's going to go under, and then I won't be able to do all of those things that I enjoy doing. So there's a personal mercenary aspect, but there's also a bigger corporate citizenry aspect as well, saying we need to help the company meet its goals so that the company is profitable and there's longevity there. So we must focus on value. All of our decisions need to be based on value and business value. And I'm talking about whipping out the calculator or Excel or project or anything like that and coming down to the penny on what something's going to cost or what the projected return on investment is. I'm talking a lot more about back of the envelope calculations. If you don't know what those are, it was something that was brought up to me back in, I think when I was in high school. Some of the math teachers would talk about, sometimes you need to be right to the penny. You need to be right to the fifth decimal places. But sometimes you just need to be close to right. The back of the envelope calculations, the one where you look at it and go, this times this plus that, that's about this, and that's good enough. So understanding what's good enough from calculating value. And there are different ways to look at value. Again, making business decisions is going to be the number one thing that's going to help us understand value. But we make that business decision shaded with technology data, because we can't just make a strict business decision, because there are lots of other aspects outside of strict dollars and cents and customer and P&L and ROI and all those things. There are technology shading aspects of this that need to absolutely be factored into those decisions that get made. And mind the budget. Every company, every organization, every team has a budget or some part of a budget that they have to adhere to. And it's going to sound trite and cliche, but you do kind of have to treat the company's money as your own. And not when it comes to, do I make a copy of this? Do I use a staple? Do I use a paper clip? No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, again, back to opportunity cost. So opportunity cost is the cost of performing one activity at the expense of another activity. So if I'm working on feature A, I'm not working on feature B. And feature B was going to get us some amount of money from some amount of clients. That is a cost, because we're either not going to see that benefit, we're not going to see that revenue, or it's going to be delayed, and money later is always not as good as money now. So we have to mind this budget, because we only have a fixed amount of money. If we're spending our budget for automation, automating a smoke suite, that might be valuable for one team. But another team might be spending a little bit of time on their smoke suite, but they're spending a lot of time maintaining their test data. So a tool or some scripts or some technological help around creating, deleting, maintaining, culling, whatever, your test data might be a better approach for that particular team to hit first, because they value that smoke suite. But a bigger value, a better immediate value, is to help with the test data management, because they're spending so much more effort on that. So mind the budget, because when you're working on something, you can't work on the other thing. Additionally, if we're spending money on an automation tool, that's money we're not spending on a human tester or a developer or some other hardware, some other software. They're not right or wrong decisions. They are business decisions, because every business decision has some sort of impact, a positive impact and a negative impact. We just need to keep those in mind, understand which one we're making, and do the best we can with the information that we have. And we really should avoid valueless accounting. So when we start looking at what value is automation adding, let's make sure we're looking at the right thing. Again, it needs to be in line with the goals, the business goals, the goals of the company, the strategy, all these other things. So is having 50% of your regression test automated, is that a business approach? Is that a business goal? Probably not, because at some point we're going to go up the food chain high enough and somebody's going to go, what? I don't care. I want to know, are we going to ship on time for this commitment that we have made to some client so that we can get some money from them, and then we're going to have some revenue from them. So that's not what we want to measure. We don't want to measure percentages. We don't want to measure test script, test case counts. What we're looking for is, When we're aligning to the values, when we're aligning to the goals, are we helping meet those goals? If one of our goals is to deliver to market faster, have we helped the delivery team go faster? And that can come in a lot of different ways. Helping them deploy more often, helping them check the quality earlier so that they understand, oh, wait, we have introduced a problem now. It's going to be generally easier for us to find and fix if we don't have a bunch of other changes to go through. Oh, wait, it takes us a lot less time to generate our test data and manage our test data now. Therefore, we can either increase coverage or we can do the same coverage in a shorter amount of time, accelerating our time to market. So the accounting, the metrics gathering, the focus on are we doing the right thing needs to be in that arena and with the lenses on of am I helping meet the business goals? And we need to understand what we value because we as people value different things as well. And again, it's context dependent, it's context sensitive. So what one organization and one team and one individual values based on time or ethics or culture or what have you, all of those things are going to be different and they're going to make your decisions different as they should. All of these decisions, all of these factors should shade our decisions and be in line with how we achieve our business goals around everything, but automation specifically because automation has become this sort of hot button thing that we do because we're doing something else. Well, we're agile, so we have to automate. Well, we're doing Scrum, so we have to automate. Well, we're doing DevOps, so we have to automate. No, 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 no. That's not how any of those things work. Those are approaches, those are cultures, those are ways of doing work and ways of interacting with other people to help us deliver, to help us uncover problems sooner before they become really ingrained and endemic types of problems, and then helps us react to those more quickly. Automation can absolutely help, but automation is not done because we do that, because we're approaching one of those particular, or we're using one of those particular approaches, or because we've adopted one of those cultures. It's because it helps us in that adoption and helps us interact with each other and helps us meet the goals. So one thing we can do with our automation is provide value. And providing value is really what we're here for. It's what the automation's for. We have to provide value. So one story that I can tell you about providing value that's outside, a little outside of the norm, is I was working with a company where we were doing this huge data center migration. And it was less of a migration as more of an evacuation, because what we were doing was we're leaving all those things which may be kicked. If you can see it and touch it, it stays. Wires, servers, racks, all that stuff stays. What's going to come to the new data center is those things which may not be seen or kicked, the software and the data. And some of these products were older, they were aging, not necessarily built for testability, certainly not built for automatability, particularly some of the older ones. Some of the new ones were, but some of the older ones were not, because we just didn't think in that manner. So imagine you've got this thing, you know how it works, and you're going to take it and you're going to bring it into this new alien world with new servers, new operating system versions, new network topology, new cables. Every now and then there might be a bad connector, a bad cable or something, right? New routing information. So everything's going to be different, except for the fact that you've got the fact that you know how the software largely and in general is supposed to work. So in order to accomplish this in a reasonable amount of time with our automation, the way we decided to do the automation help was take an approach called high volume automated testing. You can read about this easily online if you just Google high volume automated testing or HIVAT, and it'll take you to pretty much all of the research and all of the writings on high volume automated testing. So high volume automated testing has several different facets and several different approaches around long running tests to help find memory leaks and randomization to deal with the pesticide effect or the pesticide paradox. And it can actually help with finding traditional problems using non-traditional approaches. So we created two specific tools for this migration. One is called MERV, and it's a play on the military missile that's got the multi-targeted individual missiles as well. What we did was we decided and we learned that with this migration, we weren't changing the code, so our algorithms were still going to work the same way. So doing a deep regression or even a smoke test was not going to be what we wanted to do here. What we wanted to do was to make sure that the plumbing was all connected correctly. What we figured out was that if we would go to page 1, page 2, page 3, page up to page 8, we're not doing a testing. We're just clicking and going to page 8. If there was something on page 8 in the data grid there, then we knew services 1, 2, and 3 were up and running and were plumbed correctly to the front end. We're able to do this automation a lot easier and run this automation a lot faster than performing actual user workflows. Now, we did user workflows as well, but the human testers did those. The human testers went through that particular activity because that's where the value was. We helped them turn the crank, make sure the system was kind of up and running, and then they would go through and on the strategic clients, those that were going to be difficult because of their data or difficult because of our business relationship, those are the ones we focused on. And if they were working, and if all this other plumbing check was working, it was a pretty good idea, or it was a pretty good risk that we were going to be able to say, okay, everything is working well enough for us to actually do the release. That would be an example of that would be an example of repurposing tools and tests that you already have to do something else. The second is Scud, also based off of a military reference. Scud is a missile that at least came first to my attention back in the 80s, most notably because of its notoriously faulty guidance system, where sometimes it would go off in a random direction instead of actually being focused on the target that it was intended to hit. We took that sort of randomness concept in the naming of this other particular tool and created something called a random menu clicker. And the idea here was randomly click menu items and look for anything that's weird. What would be weird? How do I know what something's weird? Well, if I get a 404 or a 500 or a server crash or anything like that, any of those types of pages, that's weird. I did not want to expect any of those in our system. I also knew that we should not see the word error on any of our pages. So if any of the text on any of the pages said error, well, then we would flag that as a weirdness as well. And what this thing would do is it would run through for a certain number of clicks. Hey, run for 1,000 clicks. And it would go through the website and randomly click, and it would log out or write a log for every activity it performed. And if it found a weirdness, it would say, here's what the weirdness was, take a screenshot and dump out the HTML. So this in and of itself is not really testing. What it is, it's doing something in support of the testers, because at the end, we did not have a pass-fail report. At the end, we had a list of, hey, in that 1,000 clicks, I just found 50 weirdnesses. Now a human, a tester, someone with domain knowledge comes in and says, nope, that one's fine, that one's fine, that one's fine. Oh, wait, this looks like a problem. Oh, we did a push during that time, that one's fine. Oh, hey, here's something I haven't seen before. Let me go to the log file and look at the steps to reproduce this so that then we can deliver this information to the developers and say, or in some cases, the network team to say, look, we're getting a 404 here, something has not been deployed correctly, or something in the network is not connected correctly. So applying these non-traditional approaches to automation, again, thinking about the definition of automation as a judicious application of technology to help us do our jobs, that's what we did here. It takes a long time for a human to sit and click and wait and watch things happen. But it's much faster for a human with domain knowledge to look at a page, understand the URL and what was going on at the same time, and say, oh yeah, that's probably a problem, or no, we can say that that one's not a problem and move on. We have to sustain value. Once we've provided value, we have to sustain it. And this is where we forget about our maintenance and we get things to work. We go that last mile with the automation and we create this crazy thing that gets the last step to get sorted out. We integrate a lot of tools together, or um, we fetch things from databases and create all this other stuff, and it's great and it works. And look, I automated this one flow 100%. But man, it took forever to do it. And wow, it sure takes a lot of time to keep this up and running, and it fails 10% of the time. This is where we start eroding value. And we have to beware of creating what we call Rube Goldberg machines. So Rube Goldberg, if you're not familiar with Rube, he was a cartoonist and writer from the before times. I don't remember what year off the top of my head, but he's most famous for creating these wonderfully complex machines, or drawings and cartoons of these wonderfully complex machines, to do relatively straightforward or mundane things, like the automatic napkin and other things like that. You can look them up. If you've ever played the game Mousetrap, which is here is a picture of a life-size mousetrap that was built in, oh shoot, I don't remember where this actually was done, but there's the URLs at the bottom of the slide here for this particular picture. And it's this marvelous contraption that does all this stuff with a bathtub and a ball rolling and a crane and all this other stuff to drop a net over a mouse. And there's an actual kids game called Mousetrap that I say that I love to play, but I never played it that much. I just built the Rube Goldberg machine a lot because I thought it was cool. But it takes a long time to build. It's easy to mess it up part of the way through, and the net doesn't drop on the mouse. And then you have to go back and start over. It just takes a lot of work. The same thing with our software, with our automation. If it looks like it's going to be hard to maintain and it's got a bunch of steps and it's really brittle, we may need to take a step back and decide, is there value there? We also have to beware of the bleeding edge. In development, which automation is, and I'll put my developer hat on here and say, we developers love the new tool, we love the new technology, we love the new thing. We want to be on that bleeding edge. There is a downside to this, and the downside is sometimes the new technologies aren't ready for prime time. Also, if we're always jumping to the new technology, we have not recuperated, or we've not recouped the investment that we've put into the old technology. Sometimes it's okay to lag behind, say, look, we've done some work, now we're going to get some additional value from that work while we decide what direction we go on next. But we can't lag too far behind, because if we lag too far behind, the tool, the operating system, the application, whatever that we're using will eventually go stale. There'll be a new product technology that we need to automate against, and we won't be able to. Or the company will go out of business, or the open source tool that we're using, the implementers and the maintainers decided they don't feel like doing that anymore. They've had a life change and they don't have time, or they've gotten a different kind of job and they don't have time, or they just lost interest. There's all kinds of reasons that an open source initiative might fizzle up and go dormant. If we lag behind too far, we run the risk of having to do our migration, our support and maintenance activity at an inconvenient time when we have to, as opposed to when we can. So we have to balance the bleeding edge versus the lagging behind. And you'll notice on these three guidances here, I don't say avoid. The first version of this slide said avoid. Then I decided I didn't like that, because sometimes Rube Goldberg machines are the right thing to do. I've built them. Not only are they fun, they can be quite valuable, especially in the short term. Hey, I have to cobble this weird thing together to get us past this particular technological hurdle or past this business milestone, with an eye on the fact that it's going to provide short-term value, but over time, that value is going to erode and it's actually going to turn into cost. So we have to put a plan into place to migrate ourselves back from the Rube Goldberg machine into something that is supportable, sustainable, and will continually provide value. The main thing we have to avoid is the Pyrrhic endeavor, the automate at all cost, the get it done at all cost. In general, as long as value is being applied, something or is being obtained, something is almost always better than nothing. And it's very important to show value and to consistently and frequently show value, because what I found more than anything else, testing and automation is very much a what have you done for me lately kind of activity. Wow, look, you made the browser flash and move and it does all these things for us. Cool. That's quickly forgotten. I've worked in the organization where every year we would have to go to the people that we're providing automation for and say, what do you want to do this year? Well, we want these 12 things or these 5 things or whatever. Okay, it's going to be this much money because you're going to need this many people to do it. No, no, you have to do it for less than that. Well, no, we can't do it for less than that. Well, no, everything's running fine and we're not going to need these new things. Yes, but you need maintenance on that. And these conversations happened every year with almost every organization. So if we can get ahead and do a little marketing, and I don't mean slick flyers and stuff like that. Although if you have the ability and then the cash to do it, that maybe that's the way your particular organization likes to consume things. But demos, forums, videos, anything like that, email blasts. I know everybody gets 50,000 million emails, but some companies are email companies. Other companies, like one of the companies I used to work at, were called a walk-around company, because you could send an email, and it was generally good to send an email, but it was almost always important to follow up with a walk over to that person's desk to say, hey, did you get a chance to see that email? Let's talk about it now. Hey, while we're here, let me show you this new thing the automation's doing. Or, hey, Joe or Jane, let me see what you're testing these days. Hey, we have something to help you with that. You haven't seen it yet? Let me show it to you. And I don't know, right? Because it is going to be context dependent. Some companies, if you send an email, they're going to go, really, another email, delete. You'll get the really cynical and jaded people that'll say, you sent me an email on that? I'm absolutely not going to check out what you're doing. It has to be appropriate. So we talked a lot about the businessy type of stuff. Let's talk about the technology stuff. Because automation is software. It doesn't matter if you're doing record and playback or scriptless or BDD or drag and drop or actually coding, because somewhere under that stack, under the hood, there's some software in there. And I'll even suggest that if you're taking thing 1 and you're sequencing behind it thing 2, you have programmed, because you put some logic in place that needs to be maintained and sustained the same way 50 lines of actual C# or Java code needs to be. So we need to take care of it the exact same way. We need to plan it. Very, very seldom in an organization is a developer going to sit down and just start typing main x equals 17 and just start writing something with absolutely no idea of what he or she is writing. It's very, very seldom that that's going to happen. And that person's probably not going to be around very long, unless that's their job, is just to do sort of free form of consciousness coding to see what sticks to the wall. So we have to plan it. We have to understand, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Who do we need to be involved? When does it need to be done? Etc. Source control. It's probably a bad idea to have any of your automation just live on your desktop, because our desktops will break. I've had many, many disks fail over the years. So they have to be backed up. They have to be on a shared drive. All those things are great, but source control is going to help you understand what your changes were. Hey, when did we make change from 17 to 24 on this particular value? Let's go back in the revision history and look. Those can be important sometimes. A continuous integration environment. If you're developing your own tools, like we did with the MERV, like we did um, with Scud, you might actually want to have your own set of unit tests for it and your own build process for it. And then we've got some unit tests that actually run in this build process. So more than one person can work on this tool, this software, and then make changes, and then nobody else gets messed up because it's all tracked and built and all the tests pass. Code reviews. Code reviews are important because again, this is code. And I would say they've got a different bent to them than just the product code reviews, because very seldom are we going to bring in our clients, our users, to look at our code and do a code review. But here with automation, if we consider the testers to be the clients, to be the users of the automation, then having them as part of the code review is essential, because they need to be able to trust that the code is doing what it's supposed to do and that they understand it, and that if it fails, if some errors come out, some issues come out, that they know how to read the errors and act upon those errors. Otherwise, we're not getting all the value out of it that we should be getting. Documentation. We have to know how to document. We have to know how to use the tool. Documentation is important for that. And I've done everything. I've done everything from no documentation, which doesn't work, to the 150, 200 page user guide, which doesn't work either because it's very easily out of date and people don't read it. So we're wasting time maintaining something people don't value. Find something in the middle that's appropriate. And maintenance. I'll probably beat this maintenance horse to death throughout the rest of my career because we so often forget about it when we talk about the business aspect, because we don't think about this being software development. We don't think about the changes that are going to have to be made, or at least a lot of us don't. We're getting better. When I talk about maintenance and I talk about tools and things I'm seeing in the industry now, I'm actually seeing vendor tools talk less about, or maybe not less about, they're still talking about speed of test creation, because that's what the money people see up front. It's going to take how long to automate? But I could do that by hand so much faster. So then you have to start getting into this math about when are you going to start seeing the value out of it, et cetera. But now we're starting to talk about maintenance, and the vendors are looking at ways to make their tools and the script that you build from their tools more easily maintainable. And expertise. If you endeavor on this without some amount of expertise, you're going to make mistakes. And that's fine as long as your organization is tolerant of that, because there are really three ways to get expertise in anything, and automation is one of those, right? It's get it yourself, which is going to take time. You're going to make mistakes, and if your timeline and your organization is tolerant of that, it's very good because you learn from your mistakes, right? Another way to do it is to hire it in, is to find someone who already has the skills, who already has the expertise, hire them in and have them lead, seed, and teach. Uh, the third is to rent. You bring in someone like me who will come in and do the lead and teach and eventually evac out when you don't need me anymore. None of those approaches are wrong or bad. It's just what can your business tolerate and what is appropriate and reasonable and responsible for your business. So we talked about knowing the world before. You also have to know about the world from a technology standpoint. So knowing about, even if you don't have them now, even if you're not planning to do it now, continuous integration and continuous deployment, don't preclude your ability to work with any of these. Code and results repositories, what's out there? You have to store this somewhere. You have to store your results somewhere so that you can track, hey, we've got these failures and these other results. You don't want to be going to 50 different virtual machines to look at report results and trying to collate that way. There are tools out there that will help you do this. Code review, coding standards tools. I'm a big fan of both reviews and standards. There are tools to help you do these. I suggest that we use them because it tends to cut down on the grammar police and the punctuation police and the naming police, because that can all be codified and as part of your build activity, and you can spend your valuable human code review time actually looking for problems, potential problems, and just general maintainability. And BDD style tools. BDD is still a very sexy, popular thing out there. So I want to talk really specifically about BDD for a minute. So BDD, behavior driven development, and related is um, uh, acceptance test driven development, is not about automation. So often we think of it, and so often it's billed as automation. It's not about automation. And unfortunately, these types of approaches are jumbled in with something called test first approaches. But it's not about testing either. So BDD is about collaboration. So if we're working in a Scrum environment and we think about a story is generally considered a reminder to have a conversation, right? The story is not supposed to be fully flushed out design specification or implementation specification for a piece of software. It's meant to be, here's our frame of reference. Let's go and have a conversation so we have a shared understanding here. Think about BDD as a framework for that conversation. Here is how we're going to approach delivering this. And the output of that conversation is this business-driven development spec. But in order to do this, it requires a culture change, and that's the hard part. The automation, the testing, that's not the hard part. The hard part is the culture change, because most of us are not used to working in a culture where the developers, the testers, and some sort of business owner, product owner, whatever your vocabulary is for that, all sit and collaborate early and frequently in a development cycle, in this case, usually a sprint or an iteration, so that we have this fast feedback and a high level of collaboration. For various reasons, some cultural, some business, we're not used to this. So to be able to do this to the degree to have this shared understanding by the so-called three amigos, it requires a culture change, and that's the hard part. The rest, the fact that you can write these things as a checkable list of acceptance criteria, the fact that you can write it in an English-ish language, and the fact that you can then automate based on that Englishy language, those are conveniences that are great, but that's not what this is about. And a lot of times we don't approach it that way. So that really is the height of irresponsibility when we start talking about behavior-driven development. So on passing judgment, back to that leader that I talked about earlier. So when I say that I think he was irresponsible, over the years, I start to question that. Because on the surface, for what I know, for what I've seen, I would say that he was irresponsible. He had two experts basically telling him, let's not do this now. But I don't know what was happening in the background. I wasn't in the meeting when he made business commitments. I wasn't privy to everything he was privy to. So it could be that continuing down that road was actually a responsible decision. But because I don't have his context, I don't have his knowledge, I don't know. And unless I ever run into him again, I guess I'll never know, right? If I run into him again, I'm gonna have the conversation and say, hey, let's talk about this just for a minute. I actually speak about this from time to time. So we have to be careful when we pass judgment about people being responsible, irresponsible, and valuable, because they matter. Well, the context matters. And in one context, perhaps something that you do would be irresponsible, and the same activity in a different context would be very responsible. And we are running out of time, so I suggest we have fun. I talk about a lot of sort of onerous, heavy, sort of deep parts of automation, but I've been in automation for 25 years and it's fun. I'm still there because it's fun. It adds value. I like helping people, but I get to solve all sorts of interesting problems from a thinking standpoint and also from a coding standpoint. So for people out there that are like, oh, yeah, I think I want to do real development, or no, I want to stick with just testing. Playing around with code, and I use playing very loosely there, it could be a very valuable activity. So I know we're running out of time. I'm quickly going to go through these takeaways. Don't be purists. Beware of being Rube Goldberg. Focus on value and being appropriate. And what you're doing is not appropriate anymore. Pivot to something that's being appropriate. Treat your automation as software. And remember, if you think about automation as a judicious application of technology to help humans, your ability to solve problems and to help with technology becomes a lot wider. It becomes a lot more, there become a lot more choices there for you to have. But at the core, just be responsible. Do things that make sense, exercise good judgment, and we will probably be doing well. And again, I know we've run a little long. I don't know if we want to take questions or not, but I do have a few minutes.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch for that, Paul. That was fantastic. We do actually have a couple of questions, and as you said, I know we're running out of time here. So, to all of the attendees on the webinar, if you do have to jump off, please feel free. The questions will be included in the recorded webinar version that will be available on our YouTube in about a week's time. But I'm going to go ahead and jump into the two questions that I do see from a couple of the attendees right now. The first of which is, in your opinion, Paul, what are the least valuable automation initiatives?
The least value automation initiatives, I would not say that they are specific initiatives. They are the ones that are going to perhaps look good on numbers or on a slide, but are not actually going to provide value, or are not going to provide value in the context of delivering to your testing, delivery, and business goals.
Got it. Got it. Thank you for that. And the second question looks to be, again, in your opinion, Paul, what are the top three factors affecting value perception regarding test automation within an organization?
One of them would definitely be not treating the automation initiative as a software development initiative. As a consultant, I frequently go in to companies and I start looking at what they're doing and talking about why they're in the state they're in. And a lot of times it can be boiled down to because it wasn't treated as a software development initiative. They had people that were not the right skill set creating or working on their automation initiative. And that doesn't mean they're bad people, it just means that they were the wrong fit, or they weren't given the training that they needed to come up to speed on whatever it was they're doing. There were not appropriate processes in place and checks and approaches in place to deal with it from an automation standpoint. What gets written only works on one machine, or it only works with one user ID, or there's all this setup that has to happen by a human before you can then kick it off by hand. The approach of not treating it as software is one of the bigger things I see. The other is sort of the slave to the artificial metric. When I talk to people, what are your goals? If the goals come out and they say, well, our goal is to automate 100% of our regression or 80% of our regression testing, or anything along those lines, I always say, well, no, what is your business goal? What are you trying to accomplish? That's automating your regression or your smoke or anything is really about helping you achieve something. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And I think one of the other things that I see a lot is the managing too far down, where people at a higher level of management who shouldn't really care if the testing's done by humans or by machines or by 1,000 elves under my desk. It shouldn't matter as long as they get the information that says, here are the risks with the current release. If you release today, we can mitigate or at least give you more information on those risks if you release in a week. And approaching it from everybody's doing their right business job, that I see mistakes there, because if upper level executives are saying, I want 100% automation of my regression suite, or I want every story that comes out of a sprint to have an automation test against it, well, that's working far too high. I mean, far too low. They are far too high up in the business chain to really care and understand whether or not that's the right approach for getting the job done and using their money, their budget, in a valuable way. They have to trust that the people in the trenches working on the nuts and bolts are doing the right things and making the right decisions. If not, perhaps there's some training that needs to happen with the lower level management and the actual developers, testers, and automators to help them make better business decisions.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, and we've got a couple more here, if you all have time. It looks like someone would like for you to repeat HIVAT.
Oh, high volume automated testing.
Awesome. Okay. And then let's see here. Is BDD compulsory after automation?
No, I would suggest that if you want to take a BDD approach and get into a BDD style culture, it's the other way around. You're going to do the behavior driven development, culture change, organization change, whatever it takes to get your three amigos in place and to start having the shared understanding around these stories. Then you build out the acceptance criteria from the stories, and then you write them, and perhaps at the same step, you write them in a way that they can be automated with the tool of your choice, and they're understandable, and everyone nods their heads and says, okay, yes, this is the codified version of what we agree to. Then do the automation. So also BDD is not compulsory unless your organization or your team makes it compulsory. Automation is not compulsory unless your organization or your team makes it compulsory. Doing things that are valuable and providing value to the company appropriately and responsibly, that's what's compulsory.
Fantastic. And it looks like we have one more, Paul. This one seems to be a good one. So it looks like product manager of our team expects us to auto-generate test scripts as the UI is highly configurable. Can you please suggest what kind of approach would be best for that?
Auto-generate test scripts based on the fact that could you read that again?
Yeah, sure. So the product manager of our team expects us to auto-generate test scripts as the UI is highly configurable. Can you please suggest what kind of approach would be best for that?
Oof. So auto generation of scripts is a slippery slope in general. So the approach I would suggest is sit down with the product manager and understand what the actual goal is. What are we really looking to do? Is it really that we were trying to manage churn, or are we trying to generate the test scripts faster? Do we not care about, or should I say, create the test scripts faster? Do we not care about maintenance? Because one approach could be, well, how is the code, the UI being generated? Use the same spec and automatically generate the scripts. That's great if they all pass, but what if the spec was wrong? What if the spec was misunderstood? So now you have tests created from a broken script, checking that a product created from, I'm sorry, tests generated from a broken spec that are running against a UI created from a broken spec. So if they both say, yeah, everything is working great, but the spec is what's broken, well, then they're not really working all that great. So there needs to be some human checking in there of the results to say, are we doing the right thing? So when you start factoring that in, maybe the automatic generation is not the right approach because it's not going to add the right amount of value, or it's going to insert too much risk that's not worth the value you're saving. So I think the first step is have a conversation around what are we really trying to do and what business problem are we really trying to solve, and then take the next step from there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Paul. And with that, we are out of time, guys. I see that there are some additional questions, but in that case, please feel free to go ahead and reach out to Paul on Twitter at PG or Paul or P Grizzaffi, excuse me, spelled Pgrizzaffi, with any follow-up questions, and I'm sure he'll be happy to respond to those. And with
Sounds
that,
good.
we're going to go ahead and wrap. Thank you all again for attending the webinar, and thank you extremely, Paul, for presenting here, and we definitely appreciate the information.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. Had a good time.
Great, great. As did we. All right, everyone. And with that said, have a great day, and we'll speak to you next time. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, everyone.